Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Squamish Chamber of Commerce 2021 All Candidates Meeting. My name is Dr. Doug Monroe, and I'll be your moderator this evening. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered virtually on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish Nation, and that we are indeed fortunate to be able to live and play in this blessed territory. We're joined this evening by representatives from 4 different organizations in the Squamish community and candidates representing 6 different options on the ballot next Monday. And of course, by some 50 attendees from Squamish, and the number grows by the minute. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll give you an overview of this evening's event. Joining us on behalf of the Squamish Chamber of Commerce is the new Chamber President, Abby Magendie.
Thank you, Doug. I'm happy to be here representing the Squamish Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Abby. Representing Tourism Squamish, we are joined by Kirby Brown of the Sea to Sky Gondola.
Pleasure, Doug. Thank you for hosting.
Representing the Squamish Downtown Business Improvement Association, we are joined by Adrian Blahut.
Thank you very much for having us, and I look forward to this.
And finally, last but definitely not least, on behalf of the Squamish Chief, we are joined by Jennifer Thuncher.
Hello, thank you for having us, and welcome to the debate, all the people that are coming in so quickly.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you for your support, Liz Chamber, in organizing these events. As I said, we are joined this evening by 6 candidates, and I'm just going to ask them all to introduce themselves briefly. We have randomly drawn the order of speaking this evening, and so this order that you are about to have will be kept throughout the evening, drawn at random out of a hat. I'd like to invite Mr. Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhino Party to say hello.
Hi there, thanks for having me, and thanks to the organizers for actually inviting all of the candidates to the All Candidates meeting.
Running for no affiliation, we also have Terry Grimwood.
Good evening. Thanks, Abby, Jennifer, and I'd like to also thank the returning officer, Scott Corbett, for doing an amazing job to pull this election off in 5 weeks. It's just incredible the work he's had to do.
Thank you very much, Terry. Running for the Conservative Party, we have John Weston.
Thank you, organizers and audience and fellow contestants. I had the honor of serving Squamish for 7 years as your member of parliament, and I'm running for the Conservative Party of Canada in this election.
Running for the Green Party, we have Mike Simpson.
Hello, everybody, and thank you to the organizers, everybody that's watching, and I'll even say thank you to the people that watch this later on recorded versions.
Running to represent the Liberal Party, current MP Patrick Weiler.
Good evening, everybody. I also want to thank our organizers, everybody for tuning in, and looking forward to some spirited debate.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Of course, not too spirited. We are Canadian. Finally, representing the People's Party of Canada, Doug Bebb.
Good evening. I'm Doug Bebb, the People's Party candidate, sending you all greetings from Whistler.
Thank you very much, Doug. Now, the particularly politically astute of you in the audience will have realized that even though I said all candidates meeting, we haven't actually heard from all candidates. Despite our best efforts, we've been unable to contact independent candidate Chris McGregor, and we've also received regrets from NDP candidate Avi Lewis, who will not be participating this evening to mark the high holiday of Yom Kippur. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of other options to hold this event on another evening, and so we are having to go forward without Avi. That, however, rounds out the choices on the ballot in West Vancouver's Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky. And with that, I would like to move into candidate opening statements. So all candidates have 2 minutes to give an opening statement, introducing themselves and giving a bit of a nutshell of what their candidacy is about. And we're going to start again with Mr. Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhino Party. Gordon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Fellow civically minded citizens, I come before you both honored and humbled by the opportunity to participate in the democratic process I still believe in. That is to say, I still believe that it can be saved from the corrupt machinations of these cronies and the parties they represent. Self-regulating, backroom dealing windbags. I believe we deserve more from our leaders. Call me crazy, but I believe we should be able to count on them to treat the tax dollars we entrust them with as if they were their own family's savings. You may be laughing, but is it so crazy to have these expectations of people that we pay over 185 grand a year to? Should we not have legislation in place such that those who abuse that trust are removed from power and held to account for that abuse? That's just common sense if you ask me. Rewarding gifts and favors with big government contracts is clearly wrong, yet this is exactly what the current regime has been caught doing multiple times. When caught, instead of owning up to their misdeeds, they pretend not to know the difference between right and wrong. This is no valid excuse for anything. Two of the things I called the Liberal Party out for during the last all candidates meeting became headline news again immediately afterward. Corrupt conflict of interest in the SSC Lavalin, Aga Khan, and WE scandals, and Trudeau's fake Feminism Act are both back in the public spotlight. Selina Caesar-Chavannes has actually endorsed the Conservatives, while Jody Wilson-Raybould and the NDP seem to have publicly embraced. Just like the country said no to Harper and anything but conservative in 2015, more and more people are saying no to Prime Minister's selfie brain and anything but liberal now. Trudeau spent his time in the national debates this year avoiding questions, filibustering, and talking down to Green Party leader Annamie Paul. A total cringe fest, but pretty much on par for him. Trudeau's been going on the attack lately, ignoring the real issues for which he has no decent plan and hammering at the Conservative platform from 2 decades ago. One would think with all his attempts to buy off our media, somebody would have given him a newspaper from within the last couple of years. Voting for Liberals so the Conservatives don't win is like voting for Ebola so that cancer doesn't win. Don't vote for anything that's trying to destroy you in order to line the pockets of its friends. Thank you.
Thank you much, Jordan. We're going to move along to our next candidate, and that is Terry. Terry, the floor is yours again for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Terry Grimwood, independent. I've been, for the last 3 years, trying to start a new party called Canada Fresh, and this is my 3rd election that I participated in, but I went to Brockville, Thousand Islands in Ontario, and I also went to Toronto Centre to try and participate in those by-elections, but I wasn't able to do so. Elections Canada found a reason for me not participating. I'm really going to diverse here because our moderator is from PEI, and I wish I had their bridge going to the Sunshine Coast. I just the stats on that bridge and its environmentally friendly results would really help the Sunshine Coast, and I've already drawn it when they're ready to bite the bullet. So I'm a naval architect, but I'm also a residential builder, retired. I've personally built over $5 million, $6 million worth of homes on the Sunshine Coast. The biggest obstacle for me was Revenue Canada. When I finished those homes, the economy changed, and they have it's called self-supply. You can look it up, but I wasn't allowed to rent those homes without paying them $720,000 approximately, as if I had sold the properties to a third-party stranger. I had to pay that tax to be allowed to rent my homes, and that's just wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Our next candidate in the speaking order that was drawn earlier is John Weston for the Conservatives. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doug. You know, I'm a proud Canadian. My dad was a prisoner of war, and I have been, I'd say, colored by his service all my life. I set up the Canadian Constitution Foundation that fights for Canadian freedoms, and later the Canadian Health and Fitness Institute that seeks to make Canada the fittest nation on earth by 2030. As your member of parliament, it was an incredible experience working with the people of Squamish and the corridor and the whole riding to bring through 2 private members' bills, one on tackling crystal meth and one on creating National Health and Fitness Day, to bring no less than 4 things into budget 2015, to work on abandoned vessels, something that was high in priority for the people of Squamish. So why am I back in this race? Well, you know, our Rhino Party candidate, Gordon, just expressed a huge amount of cynicism, and that's nothing to laugh at. all around the riding, as I've connected with people again, I've seen people who've been somewhere between disappointment and disgust at what has occurred over the last 6 years. A prime minister who's called this unnecessary $610 million election in a pandemic. A prime minister who's let us down on feminism, let us down on accountability, let us down in Afghanistan, let us down in reconciliation, let us down on the economy, and let us down on the environment. But happily, it's a season for change. And I'm very proud that the Conservative Party has a 160-page new platform, a platform that is a comprehensive plan to secure the future, recover jobs, expand the economy, versus what we have in contrast, possible re-election of a prime minister who wants a 4-year majority, has called this election in a pandemic for that reason, while BC was burning with wildfires, who would bring about more division, more unemployment, and more debt. So it's a big decision we have. We have a season of change, and the people all around the riding are calling for that change now.
That is 2 minutes. Our speaking order now turns to Mike Simpson from the Green Party. Mike, over to you. And again, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Doug. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to talk at an all candidates meeting. I think I've been to every single one that I've been invited to so far. And I do believe that's because one of the principles of the Green Party is participatory democracy. We do need to get together and hear each other talk, hopefully influence each other. And that actually is one of the key reasons why I think that you should vote Green and you should vote for me. One is because the Green Party has actually garnered 22% of the vote in this riding, and we are continuously influencing other parties to come to our point of view. And our point of view on climate change is absolutely dominating this election. You'll hear all of the party candidates talk about it. And the reason I'm in this election is because normally I've been a filmmaker. Normally I've worked for nonprofits. For the last 40 years, I've worked on many different causes, from working in the Amazon to working in West Africa on, everything from human rights and child soldiers to literally trying to stop rainforests from being cut down. But at this point, I'm absolutely terrified about where we're going on the graph in terms of climate change. We're climbing straight towards 3.5 degrees. It will fundamentally change all of our lives in this riding. And the bottom line is that the time is running out to be able to make the decisions that need to be made. And they are some really tough decisions. They're transformative decisions, the kinds of decisions that are going to require a huge amount of dedication to the science of climate change. And so far, from what I can tell, the Green Party is the only ones that will actually lock themselves to the science. What does make me happy is that we have deeply influenced other parties to move our direction on the science, to move our direction on what we're saying, that this needs to be a holistic view of where we want to go in the future so that we can actually survive. And it is literally, unfortunately, a matter of surviving this century. So I'm running because I have a 9-year-old daughter. I've been to over 60 countries. I've been to some of the toughest places on the planet. And I'm fully convinced that if we don't wake up in Canada to the climate reality that we're in, the smoke that you smelt this summer, the droughts that you saw in the prairies, if we don't realize that the heat domes that we had, the intertidal zone that died this summer, if we don't realize that those things are only going to get worse, then we are going to forfeit our future. So I'm running on a green platform.
Thank you very much, Mike. Our next candidate is Patrick Weiler for the Liberals. Patrick, again, 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Before my opening statement, I just want to start by acknowledging and celebrating that as of yesterday, Howe Sound is officially a UNESCO biosphere. Over 5 years went into this effort, and it shows what's possible when communities and a region come together to recognize the global significance in our region. And I'm very proud to have played a small part in bringing this to fruition. My name is Patrick. I grew up in West Vancouver in Sechelt. I'm an environmental lawyer by trade. I've worked with First Nations and municipalities on environmental assessments, on rights and title cases, and I've worked to bring about international cooperation on UN-led projects. I know that collective action is possible because I brought countries together to manage environmental issues in international water bodies. As an environmental lawyer, I was very frustrated with the unfair laws brought in by the Harper Conservatives, and I knew I could do more to change them as a legislator than as a lawyer, and so here I am. But I'm not just here for the environment, I'm here for everything that affects people in Squamish. Affordability is a huge issue. That's why we built 236 affordable homes right here in the last 2 years, and why we have a comprehensive housing plan to make home ownership a reality for everyone. Childcare is also big in a region where many are paying $100 a day if they can get it at all. And this summer, we signed an agreement with the province to bring in $10 a day childcare and for the creation of 40,000 new spaces right across the province. So this is real. It's already signed. Unfortunately, the Conservatives want to rip it up. On reconciliation, we've done a lot, but there's always more to do. We've made progress and completed 80% of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action that are under federal jurisdiction, including importantly passing the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into Canadian law this year. And finally, COVID-19 is still here. Our government has said we'd have the backs of the people and the businesses, and we did. The wage subsidy alone has kept 620,000 people in BC on the job at the height of the crisis. And we have a plan to reach herd immunity through vaccines, and we'll always be there for businesses. We only need to look at what Jason Kenney has wrought on Alberta to see how things would have gone under Conservative government federally. The Conservatives want to take Canada back, so the choice in this election is clear: backwards with the Conservatives or forwards with the Liberals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That is 2 minutes. And our final candidate for the opening statements, Mr. Doug Bebb from the People's Party of Canada.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Squamish Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event, and to Doug, Louise, and Andrew for making it happen. My name is Doug Bebb, and I am the People's Party candidate for this 44th general election. I'm a semi-retired mechanical engineer, an MBA, both degrees from UBC. I'm now 64 years old, and for the first 62 years of my life, I had no interest in being a politician. But in 2019, when Max Bernier put a light of hope on the horizon, providing us a real chance to fix Canada, I found no choice but to lend all my support to his efforts. I consider my presence here today to be a necessary patriotic duty. Freedom in Canada is under attack on multiple fronts, and we must mount a defense. To quote from Patrick Henry's speech of March 23rd, 1775, "There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged." But in our case, the clanking of chains may be heard in the pronouncements of the United Nations and of the World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab. The People's Party is doing politics differently. We will not pander to special interests to buy their votes. We are all Canadians, and we should all receive equal treatment from our government. Equal rights for all must mean special rights for none. Well, the gloves are coming off tonight, and I can promise you a thoroughly entertaining evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. We're going to move into the panelist questions now. So these are questions from the partner organization sponsoring the event. And for those of you in the audience who haven't attended one of these chamber meetings before, we have 2 rounds of questions. Our first round of questions will be posed by our partner organizations. All of the candidates will answer those questions in turn. So you'll have an opportunity to compare what they have to say about the same things that are issues facing our community. We will then move to a second round of questions from the audience. That's where your questions get posed to the candidates. In order to hear from the largest number of audience members possible, each candidate answers 1 question, and then we move on to another question for the next candidate. To pose your questions, you can use the Q&A function in Zoom. So you'll find that along the bottom of your screen and most interfaces, the small letters Q&A and some speech balloons. You can just type your question in there, and then when we come to it, we will work through the questions. We will try to focus on questions that touch directly on federal jurisdiction. If you have a question for a specific candidate, you are welcome to place the candidate's name in the question, and we will try to direct it towards that candidate. If your candidate is if your question is to any candidate, then simply ask it. And if we do move your question out of the question list, it is because, in our view, it touches on something that isn't in federal jurisdiction. We, of course, try to avoid this as much as we can. You don't need to wait until the audience question section begins. You can start putting questions in the Q&A box at any time. And we will turn now to questions from our partner organizations. And As the sponsor of the event, we're going to begin with the Squamish Chamber of Commerce. So over to you, Abby, for the question from the chamber.
Thank you, Doug. So the Squamish Chamber of Commerce is the oldest and largest business organization in the Squamish community, representing nearly 600 members. We are dedicated to enhancing the quality of life in Squamish by actively supporting business, economic growth, and economic diversification. Over the last 18 months, small businesses have been challenged by labor shortages, rising wages, increased costs of goods, and an unpredictable operating environment. Issues such as labor have been exacerbated by the pandemic. In Squamish, we have a young, educated, and willing workforce, but we have very limited childcare, which is disproportionately affecting women who want to return to the workforce and negatively affects both the local economy and access to community services. Our question is, what is your party's position on childcare? And if elected, how will you assist Squamish in achieving an access rate target of 30%? That is 30 spaces per 100 children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby, for that topical and extremely specific question, my favorite kind. We're going to go through the candidates in the same order. Again, all candidates will have the opportunity to answer this question. We're going to start with Gordon from the Rhino Party. Gordon, the floor is yours. And as always, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I won't need the 2 minutes. I will forego some of my time for everyone else's benefit. My party has no stance on subsidized childcare, which may come as no surprise. I personally support it. I would implement subsidized childcare. I think it's very important to take the best care possible of our youth. But more importantly, I feel it's necessary to mention that this was a big issue actually last election. And some of you may recall that our incumbent Patrick Weiler spoke about implementing subsidized healthcare, or rather childcare, and we don't have it. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Gordon. Terry, over to you. And again, 2 minutes.
Thank you. My approach to childcare would be to have facilities built on all existing school facility grounds right across Canada. And if the federal government, I'm just one person, but if the federal government's prepared to fund it, that's where I would do it. We have the lands, and I think it would work very well. The people that are going to staff it need to be educated. So we need new programs to support them. But a lot of families are already bringing their children to the elementary schools. And I think it would be a synergy to have them be bringing their younger ones too. So that's my vision. I'm a builder, and I know that those facilities could go up in months. We just have to get the municipality to move the building permits through quickly and have the government fund it before we build it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. John, over to you again for 2 minutes. I'm sorry, John, you may need to unmute your microphone.
Okay, I suppose that's better. Thank you for the question. It's something that came up time and again as I spoke to parents and operators of childcare centers throughout the riding. This seems like a desperate attempt by the Liberals to do something they've been promising to do for years. In fact, it will be surprising to people, Gordon, that it's not just in the last election, but in 8 previous elections since 1993, the Liberals have promised to do this. And I wish Abby Lewis were here because he would tell you that this is basically a steal from the NDP platform. The Conservative approach is much more broad-based, much more available to parents. it would convert the existing childcare deduction into tax credit that could be worth as much as $7,500 per family. And the distinction is really clear. To achieve what the Liberals are trying to do, you're looking at possibly years in the making as you build an Ottawa's knows best sort of bureaucratic approach where people are driven to send their children elsewhere, as opposed to an approach which is accessible to people who may want to have childcare, for instance, at home. So typical distinction, the Conservative approach is to dwell on freedoms, on personal choice, on families making their own choices. And we believe that this is the way to go. If the Liberals had the corner on this market, then why would they have waited 6 years into their mandate? Why didn't they just go ahead and bring about this miraculous response instead of calling an election in a pandemic?
Thank you very much, John. Mike, the floor is now yours for this question on childcare. And
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think that the whole idea of childcare in the Green Party is that it must be affordable, and affordable in some cases may even mean free. And this is why we've actually linked issues like childcare to universal livable basic income, because it depends on where you are in Canada and what your circumstances are. Life in Vancouver is far more expensive than it might be in rural Saskatchewan. And so the idea behind a universal basic living income is to give you that basic level that you're going to be able to meet your needs of affordability, and that will include affordable childcare. So we've actually put forward the idea of a children's advocate to ensure that there will be childcare and that need will be met. We also expect that there would be a $1 billion investment and that would advance every year in terms of childcare. So I actually thoroughly love the idea of the Liberal idea of a $10 minimum on childcare, but would also point out that even for some people that is not enough, because we have to make sure that everybody can get childcare, like the model in Norway, where nothing impedes women from being able to go to school. Nothing impedes marginalized populations from being able to get an education, to be able to move on. And this also equalizes things for women and addresses the whole idea of gender equality, which is incredibly important also in our policies.
thank you very much, Mike. Over to you, Patrick. You've been quite patient throughout this whole period. You now have 2 minutes for your own answer to this question.
Thanks, Doug. And I think this is a really important question to ask because, as I mentioned in my opening, families in Squamish are very much struggling, not only with the cost of childcare, but just accessing it. And the main distinction between what we've actually, it's not just proposed, we've actually signed a deal with 8 of the 10 provinces in Canada, including BC, which was the first one that was signed. I mean, the Conservatives want to bring in a boutique tax credit that does not work. We actually had a universal childcare deal that was signed with all the provinces and territories back in 2006 by Ken Dryden. But of course, when the Conservatives were brought in, they scrapped it right away. So our plan will actually save families up to 18 times more than the Conservative approach will. The Conservative approach will also do nothing to build new spaces. Our plan is going to build 40,000 new spaces right across the province, and those spaces are needed in Squamish more than anywhere else. And this is a measure actually that all the leading economists in the country, is including the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, has said that we'll do more to increase GDP than any other single measure. So this is a very smart approach, not just for our economy, but it's also going to give children the best start to life. It's going to provide some relief to families. It's going to help parents, but especially more women to get back into the workforce. So we have the plan, it's in place. It's really important that we don't scrap it again because we need to get those spaces built in Squamish. And it's been a big challenge to date under the province's existing formula for building spaces, just because the cost of land is quite high in Squamish. But parents have told me, and actually the most passionate meetings I have had over the last couple of years have been with parents bringing this up and letting me know how critical this is of an issue. And this is really one of the most important things we can do to also deal with some of the labor shortages that we have. So I would say this is one of the key issues in this election. We need to move forward with the plan we have now signed, and we can't move backwards.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That is 2 minutes. And Doug, over to you for the last answer to this question on childcare.
Okay, well, subsidized childcare already exists in Quebec as a provincial program and that could possibly serve as a national model. The People's Party has no particular direct policy on childcare, but what we can do is to cut back on the level of immigration that's putting pressure not only on housing prices, on medical wait times, school spots, the availability of childcare. All these things are only going to get worse if we continue to have 300 or 400 or more thousand immigrants per year that we really haven't been able to absorb. And so we're going to take a break. We're going to limit immigration to 150,000. And some might be tempted to conclude that that would exacerbate the labor shortage. But the fact is, I've talked to many people in Squamish, and they're going rock climbing on CERB rather than go to work. And so these incentives the Liberal government has put in place in order to ease the COVID problem is actually a big factor in causing this lack of available work. And everybody knows this. It's you talk to anybody in restaurants there that's working, and half of them just don't really want to work because it doesn't pay them any more and often less than CERB would provide for them. And that's about all I have to say on childcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. We now turn to our next partner organization, represented by Kirby Brown, who is the Chair of Tourism Squamish. Kirby, the floor is yours for your question for these fine candidates.
Thank you, Doug. Candidates, Canada lags behind many other countries in its marketing and general tourism development investments. And in a post-COVID recovery effort, it's going to take all levels of government to cooperate and invest in marketing, product development, and other infrastructure investments. So specifically, what will your party do to encourage further tourism destination development to ensure new market-ready experiences for visitors to the Seasky region while preserving a sustainable tourism economy?
A complex bundle of issues in that question, Kirby. Thank you very much for it. And once again, we're going to start at the top of our speaking order. Gordon, the floor is yours for an answer to our question on tourism. As always, 2 minutes.
My party has no stance on this. And while I do have a stance on this as basically an independent, my ability to influence this in this topic would be slim to none. So I really hope that whoever makes it does kickstart tourism, because my real job depends on it. Thank you.
Let it never be said that politicians don't have their skin in the game on this sort of a thing. Terry, the floor is yours.
Thank you. On the Sunshine Coast, we've all been reading about the tennis players in New York, and the Canadian born and raised, and how much success they're having. On the Sunshine Coast, there's people mountain biking, and a young lady from our community, I believe, came in second in a World Cup type competition in Switzerland. So we have young people that are almost, if not the best in the world at what they do. And even in the Olympics, we had a young lady in cycling who trained for 3 years and was 27 years old and won a gold medal at the Olympics. She trained for 3 years to do that. And I think we need to put the spotlight on our young people and encourage the facilities that they need to skateboard, downhill racing, skiing. I grew up with Whistler when it opened in '65 with Garibaldi lifts. Didn't miss a weekend for many, many years. So I just think that we need to make the lands available. I'd like to see homesteading. My parents, my father and his brothers owned cabins on Hollyburn Mountain and Seymour Mountain when I was a child. And we need to get our people in the community that want to have a cabin or want a summer place. We need to support them being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. John, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
we all know that tourism is a huge economic driver, not just for the Sea to Sky, but we in the Sea to Sky are responsible for so much revenue throughout the province. So the first level of answer is kickstarting the economy. And the Conservative plan is to restore 1 million jobs within a year. We're looking at providing incentives for employers in the tourism and other industries to hire people back. So that means a subsidy between 25 and 50% for people who've not been on that workforce before. Also, tax credit of 25% for people who are expanding their small businesses, putting up to $100,000 in that business. There's thirdly, a loan of up to $200,000 for people who are expanding their small businesses. So a real positive counterbalance to the mismanagement of the economy over the last 6 years. You know, we've seen so much pressure on our economy through the surging debt. We're looking at $40 billion in debt service charges by 2025. So if the Liberals continue in government, we're looking at taxes, taxes, taxes. On the tourism side specifically, some very innovative suggestions. A 50% rebate for people who dine in between Monday and Wednesday on their meals, a 15% tax credit for staycations for people who travel in Canada, and a cancellation of the Liberals' escalator on alcohol. So these are reflections of Aaron O'Toole and the party's understanding of what we really need here in the Sea to Sky. When I was your MP, we had a great tourism roundtable with Nancy Green-Rain and others. We came up with some 4 recommendations that brought your leader, Doug, Maxime Bernier, to our riding to focus on tourism. I'll be doing that again.
Thank you very much.
If I'm your member of parliament.
Thank you. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, well, I'd love to promise you the world on this one, but this is a really tough question. And it is because as long as COVID is working is doing its thing, let me put it that way, globally, we have a crippled tourism industry, and any tourism industry anywhere in the world is facing the same hardships. And so the only answer that I can see is that we solve the COVID issue by really aggressively pushing vaccinations in Canada and pushing vaccinations globally, because we can't solve if people are not going to internationally travel. And if that is a core basis for you to be able to run your tourism industry, there's only 2 answers: either that we have more local tourism to keep up your businesses, or we solve the problem internationally and people can travel again. And there's no magic answer there, other than that we do invest heavily multilaterally in trying to solve the COVID problem internationally. And the other question, or the other answer that I can see, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I believe that if we have more resilient tourism, diversified tourism, and realize that there are many ways in which local people can sustain the tourism industry. Let me give you a couple of examples. Even just the number of kite surfers that are down there at Squamish Spit right now, that's a viable part of the economy. The climbers that are climbing. I talked to one yesterday who was hitchhiking on the road. She came from Quebec. It's still possible to travel in Canada. It's still possible to keep those going. And so what we say in the Green Party, again, is we need to take a holistic view and make sure that people have a universal basic income so that we can come out of COVID, not go backwards to the way it was before, but go forwards to the way that it needs to be. And if everybody has a universal basic income, you can rest that you will survive. You're going to be okay. And then we're going to be able to move towards a more resilient and diversified economy, and one that absolutely has to take into account that the future is actually going to be tough. COVID's tough, but climate change is unbelievably tough. And until we actually build a resilient and diverse economy, your tourism won't survive either of those global systemic shocks. And so we talk in the Green Party about having a more global view on this.
Thank you, Mike. For our final answer on the question of tourism, we turn to Doug Bebb from the People's Party. Doug, over to you.
Wait, Doug, I should have a chance
I'm sorry, Patrick, yes.
Patrick's next, yes.
I apologize. Moderator fail. Over to you then, Patrick, and the clock starts as usual.
No worries, Doug. Well, I just want to start by saying that we've actually restored 258,000 jobs in the last year. And BC actually now has more people employed than before the pandemic. But we're still seeing some sectors that are having challenges recovering, and tourism is certainly one of them. And that's why we proposed in our platform this year to extend the 75% wage subsidy for tourism businesses right through the winter until the end of March. But I completely agree with what Mike said. The most important thing to do for any part of our economy, but especially tourism, is for everybody to get vaccinated. So we have a plan to do that. We're proposing requiring federally regulated workers and those that are traveling interprovincially by train or by plane to be vaccinated. And this is going to help us push or help some of the vaccine hesitant people to finally get vaccinated. At the same time, internationally, we're one of the largest contributors to COVAX to actually get vaccines in the hands of developing countries, because we really do need to eliminate this everywhere. I sit on the Bipartisan Tourism Caucus because we live in a world-class destination, and because it's been hit so hard over the last 18 months, it's been so important to hear directly from tourism operators. And tourism DMOs in our riding have really told me what's needed. And we focused a lot on making sure some of our key destinations are going to have what they need to get through this pandemic. And certainly Sea to Sky Gondola is one of those. And I was really proud earlier this year to launch our Tourism Relief Fund. And this is a $500 million fund, which is going to focus on both product development and destination development to be able to market for when people are able to come back to Canada. And so under this fund, we do have a set aside specifically for Indigenous tourism operators, as well as looking ahead to some more sustainable tourism. Because when we come back from the pandemic, we need to do this in a way where we're going to be more sensitive to some of our environmental impacts, particularly with long haul tourism, which of course is some of the highest value, but we need to find a way to reduce our impacts from that and being able to market our world-class destination that we have right here in the Sea to Sky.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And thank you for interrupting me when I moved past you there. Much appreciated. All right, this time, definitely over to Doug Bepp.
Sure. Well, Mike and Patrick are trying to force vaccinate everybody. Yet the vaccination is failing in Israel, which is one of the biggest, most uptake of vaccines anywhere in the world. The vaccines were never intended to prevent disease. They were intended with their clinical studies to reduce symptoms and prevent bad outcomes. And so that was the initial strain. And now with the Delta variant, the vaccines are failing miserably. And with the strains in the future, the efficacy of vaccines is likely close to zero. The People's Party solution to tourism is to reopen our borders and remove all the lockdown measures. Australia has proven beyond any doubt that a zero COVID policy is just not workable. We're going to have to live with this disease one way or the other. And that includes allowing Canadians to make their own healthcare choices, including the alternative treatments I'll explain later when I talk more about COVID. We recognize that while these lockdowns are under provincial control, the simple fact is that the provinces would stop all this madness the very same day we withdraw the subsidies that enable their violations of our charter rights. So that's what we're going to do. We'll eliminate all these destructive subsidies to the provinces that enable them to trample all over our charter rights, subsidizing businesses that are suffering under draconian public health measures by spending huge amounts of money, freshly minted by the Bank of Canada, might have provided some short-term relief. But now that the liberal inflation has begun to rage in Canada, the time to end this insanity is today. The People's Party will put Canada back in business, helping tourism and every other aspect of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you all candidates for your answers to the question on tourism. Obviously, of course, the shadow of COVID casts a long shadow over all of the questions tonight. I'd like to turn now to Adrian Blahu from the Squamish Downtown Business Improvement Association for our third panelist question. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Doug. In our current day and age, we are in a crisis of trust. Trust in politicians, trust in science, trust in media, trust in society, and trust that we have a future to look forward to. Classically, your job involves a lot of lip service, and today will be an example of that. How do you plan to combat this crisis of trust and bring your riding into the fold on decisions in a way that allows for critical and honest feedback and transparency in your mistakes, because we all make them?
Thank you very much, Adrian. So turning now to trust and transparency. Again, we'll open candidate answers by hearing from Gordon Jeffrey of the Rhino Party. Gordon, over to you.
Thank you so much. What a great question. My track record on this is pretty clear. I'm very, very opposed to not only corruption, but any kind of bad behavior, misleading, lying from our leaders, of which there is far too much. When caught with his hand in the cookie jar, what does Trudeau do? Deny, deny, deny. That's basically the Liberal Party game. Do whatever you want behind closed doors, promise everyone the world on a silver platter. And then when you can't live up to any of those expectations, or you get caught with your misdeeds, just deny and then repeat those denials ad nauseum and say them louder and louder. I recall actually a video of a former Liberal MP, Catherine McKenna, surfacing before the 2019 election, where she said basically that it's their modus operandi. Just repeat it and say it louder, and if you stick to your talking point, people will actually believe it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Terry, over to you on the question of building trust.
Well, I don't know if everyone on this panel knows, but Canada is #1 in the world for educating our populace. And we need to continue putting an emphasis on education. I think that a lot of the problems are because we can't trust the information that we get through the different media. We need to have more, and that's more communication. And with the last 2 years of a minority government, I would have liked to seen a nonpartisan approach to so many issues. There's so much housekeeping that needs to be done, and we're working with laws and rules that were put in place 40, 50 years ago. I can remember as a teenager, the Liberal government leasing lands from the Squamish Nation underneath or to the east of the First Narrows Bridge. Nothing was ever built on those lands. They're still vacant, but the government was paying millions of dollars to the Squamish Nation for those leases. I don't know what the status of them today, but that was back in the days of Jack Davis, the fisheries minister. And so you can see I'm 69 years old and I have a good memory, but I spent 4 terms on the North Van City Council as an alderman in 1972, 73, 74, and 75 while I was a university student at UBC. It was a very good education for me, and I had an opportunity to work closely with
Thank you very much, Terry. I'm afraid that is 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Moving right along, we'll turn now to Joan Weston for the Conservative Party on the question of trust.
Doug, thanks, and Adrian for the question. I think this is an election about trust. There's no more important question than trust in this election. If we erode trust in our institutions, then people don't vote, they don't participate, and they don't subscribe to the rule of law. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why people around the riding are calling for change. This Prime Minister called for transparency and accountability, and what did he give us? 3 ethical scandals, breaches of the law. He promised us a profile in foreign affairs, and what did he give us? He left our Canadian people and allies stranded in Afghanistan. He promised us reconciliation, and what did he deliver? He didn't deliver water on reserves. He promised us a robust economy. We have a $1.4 trillion debt. This Prime Minister has accumulated more debt than all previous Prime Ministers previous. We all saw the news today about the hikes in the cost of living. We know the debt service charges that await us and the people of the younger generation who are going to face that. He promised us progress on the environment and missed year after year his targets. He promised us to be a feminist. And you know what? People around the riding are echoing what Selena Cesar-Chavani's asked in her book. Can you hear me now? It's time for us to have change. It's time to return integrity to the Prime Minister's office. And it's time for change.
Thank you very much, John. Moving right along, we're going to turn the floor over to Mike Simpson from the Green Party for the question on trust. Mike, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. It's a great question because I do think that people are confused about what do we do in a politics where people are always butting heads as if the other side is completely right or completely wrong and only they are right. And something that we in the Green Party are very proud of is the idea that we can see the partial truths in many different views because you can see why they're shaped the way they are. And because of the background of that person and where they're coming from and how they're thinking. And what we're trying to do in politics is a discourse in which we can take the good ideas of the Conservatives, the good ideas of the Liberals, or the good ideas of the NDP, and instead of butting heads like that, understand how we can transform and include both of them to come with a third idea that includes both and gets to the point, which is that we have some incredibly important problems to solve. And that's going to require us to cooperate more, collaborate more, than to continue to butt heads. And this is really important because time's running out. We actually don't have time anymore to say, oh, the other person's completely wrong. We have to hear them. Understand, for example, on vaccines, there's legitimate fears people have. There are legitimate fears of Indigenous communities in, for example, the healthcare system. We need to hear that, understand that that's an emotional response, right? And that we have to trust that that's true. The same thing is going to happen for climate change. There will be people that completely deny climate change. I've spent 25 years trying to convince people intellectually that climate change is real. There will be people that respond from that with such a deep sense of fear that they will completely deny it. That's a limbic or emotional response. And our goal in the Green Party is to be able to recognize these different ways of thinking and to try to be more collaborative, inclusive, try to be able to hear, what does Patrick have to say? He's got some good ideas. What does John have to say on human rights? He's got some good ideas, and Avi's got some wonderful ideas on climate change. Our goal, as I said, I'm going to emphasize it, is come together in politics and overcome the distrust in order to be able to actually hear each other. And I hope that I'll be able to do that in this riding as a Green Party person.
Thank you very much, Mike. Patrick, I'm not forgetting you this time. The floor is yours for the question on trust.
Thank you. And Adrian, I think it's a very important question, and you have to link those two together because the only tonic for mistrust is transparency. And I think we've seen some very worrying signs over the course of the last 18 months. And I think it's maybe a function of not engaging with as many people anymore, and not having those conversations in the street, and really getting stuck in our own bubbles. And when we're not exposed to other views, we get very stuck in our ways, and then we get mistrustful of things that don't fit within our own paradigm. And I think we've seen that particularly in the course of the pandemic on vaccines. I think is a really important part where I think a lot of times people are listening to what they hear on social media rather than what the science and what the health experts are telling us. And that's a very disturbing trend. I mean, we've seen this happen in other countries, but certainly we're not immune from that in Canada. And we do need to have our eyes wide open about that. And I think it's incumbent on whoever you choose as your MP that they embody transparency, that they be, because when someone gets elected as an MP, that is a role you're now working for everybody. So it's great that we're now having these discussions where we're having a spirited exchange of ideas, but once that person is elected, it's important that they listen to all views. They take those all into account, because as Mike said, everybody has their own good ideas. And it's important for people to be heard. And oftentimes I find once you hear somebody out, you're able to understand where someone's coming from. And oftentimes, even if they're not, even if you don't agree at the end of it, you come to a level of understanding on where someone's coming from, and you can really diffuse a lot of situations. So I think transparency is key, doing the outreach, having those meetings, not avoiding the hard questions, not avoiding the hard meetings, giving people straightforward answers. I think those are qualities that an MP should have, and those are ones that I've tried to embody as your MP over the last 2 years.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And again, rounding out the candidates on the question of trust, Doug, over to you.
Well, no, Patrick, trust in government is not a function of engagement. It's a function of consistent ethical behavior, which is completely lacking in your current liberal government. It's not an indictment of you. I mean, you're a good guy, I think, but your government's corrupt. It's simple as that. Trust in government means confidence by the citizens that the government will always act in the best interest of its citizens. When corruption sets in, when government begins to act in the interest of special interest groups, that's when confidence erodes and trust disappears. The People's Party is new, it's uncorrupted, and makes the explicit promise that it will not pander to special interests, take money on the sly, all these things where there's a circular flow of money around and special deals for groups with government like your party does. And it's been proven several times. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to model, I'm going to read from this recent pamphlet here. This came in the mail to everybody in our riding. And so we're going to clean Ottawa. We're going to model the highest standards of honesty and fidelity to our public office. And that's all I have to say on that matter.
Thank you very much, Doug. And thank you to all candidates for some thought-provoking answers on the question of trust. We're going to turn now to Jennifer Thuncher from the Squamish Chief for our final panelist question. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you. We all live and work on Squamish Nation territory, and truth and reconciliation work is increasingly important to many people here. So what concrete things would you or your party do to meet the TRC recommendations while in office that we would see in the Sea to Sky?
An excellent question. And again, I like the specifics. What will we see here in the Sea to Sky? Gordon, we're going to start with you. Gordon, you may need to unmute your microphone.
Sorry about that. Yeah, truth and reconciliation. I don't know how we can be talking about reconciliation when so many people, so many of our fellow Canadians still don't have clean drinking water. You're probably going to hear this touched on multiple times throughout this. But again, you say Walkerton, and instantly anybody over 30 knows exactly what you're talking about. It's seared into our brains. This one small town in Ontario, 5,000-ish people, mostly European descent, didn't have clean drinking water, and everybody knew about it. It's been what, 21 years since then, and a lot of these communities have not had clean drinking water this entire time. 2 years ago, Mr. Weiler and the Liberals promised that we would have this issue resolved by this year, and we're approaching the end of this year, and still a lot of work needs to be done. I'm sure he'll say, oh, we've gotten so much done, especially in light of COVID. But I mean, you want to talk about essential work, essential services, like getting these people clean drinking water. What could be more important than that? So as for Squamish specifically, I don't know, but I'll tell you, we need to make some real progress, not only in getting clean drinking water, but addressing justice for the residential school situation. People keep talking about uncovering the rest of the truth. Nobody's talking about justice. Nobody's talking about pressuring the Catholic Church to acknowledge their role or take responsibility. It's ridiculous. Another good thing we need to do, we need to sever formal ties with, not sever ties, but formally separate from the British monarchy. We've done this in practice mostly years ago, but I think it would be a really positive gesture towards building a unified Canada, forging a unified Canada with all of our brothers and sisters if we, got rid of the formalities there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Terry, over to you.
I'm struggling because I'm number 2 all the time and I don't get to hear everybody else's ideas and get to steal them. I'm having to originate everything for them. They're all stealing my ideas. But with reconciliation, it'll only happen when we're all given the information and we assimilate all the different ethnic groups along with education programs. But there's so many tangible things about reconciliation. Canadians don't realize with the forest fires that we've been having for so many years, and I've been advocating for the Air Force to buy water bombers instead of bombers of mass destruction. Just in the paper, in the news in the last few days, with Australia, England, and the US getting together to build 12 nuclear submarines. Canada wanted to build nuclear submarines, and we never hear anything about our military other than the sexual exploits of our leaders. But I think that the water bombers, it's native land to a large extent. I've been across Canada 3 times in the last 3 years, and it's native land that is getting devastated in this country. And you're not going to get anybody on side if we don't provide the support to put those fires out. We've let them burn. I'm amazed that they still vote Liberal. But anyhow, I think that water bombers, Canada has the 2nd largest landmass in the world. We should have the 2nd largest fleet of
Thank you very much, Terry. That is
water bombers.
Thank you, Terry. And moving right along, we are over to John Weston for the Conservative Party. John, the floor is yours.
You know, I had the privilege to work on bringing back Canada's Constitution as a young member of the BC government, and then with Quebec. And in that exercise, I saw that it was absolutely essential for us to think long-term in the things that we do relating to our Constitution. Reconciliation is a key aspect of our bringing our country together. It's still a work in progress. So I'm pleased that the Conservative Party has some very specific things. It would help young leaders gain leadership training, working with the Institute of Corporate Directors in other ways, would work with the First Nations Financial Authority, which can monetize government assistance and empower First Nations to do things really well. The Squamish First Nation has done a great job of actually creating that law. Also respecting the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, working through making sure that there are good ways that prior informed consent can be dealt with so that this becomes an actual practical advantage to the First Nations. There's also a disturbing trend that a higher proportion of people in First Nations take their lives by suicide than the rest of the population. And the Conservative platform addresses that directly. There will be a suicide line to work with. There will be a focus on mental health that should be a benefit to all Canadians, including First Nations people. Provision of 1,000 long-term treatment beds and some 50 treatment centers across the country, empowering people at all levels. And as somebody who brought through that tackling crystal meth private members bill.
I'm sorry, John, I'm afraid that is 2 minutes.
Very, very, very pleased to see.
Thank you very much, John. Mike, we turn now to you and your question, or sorry, your answer to this question.
Thank you. Well, what can you expect of a Green MP? And me in specific is that I will hold people accountable on this. There have been 94 recommendations of the TRC, only 15 have been accomplished. And John, I must say, for you to stand there and talk about UNDRIP when it was the Conservatives that opposed UNDRIP is absolutely unbelievable. The same thing holds true for the other parties. I will hold the Liberals accountable when the Squamish Nation in our riding is taking them to court over the TMX. Read the Supreme Court ruling and you will quickly see that the judge said that it was incomprehensible that every single time there's a consultation, the government always never says no. And so when people step forward and say, for example, the Squamish Nation has stood forward and said, no more logging, no more, a moratorium on old growth logging. Well, the NDP has to hear that when they're cutting down old growth in Fairy Creek right now, that it has to stop. The other thing is they have to hear in our, you asked the question is what's going to happen in our riding? Well, what should happen in our riding is we should listen to the Blueberry Nation, who just won a court case after UNDRIP was passed in the Senate in June. And what did they win on? They won on the fact that self-determination and the gas that lies underneath them, which is going to be fracked and sent into Squamish into an LNG plant to be shipped overseas, that they were never consulted and it's wrong. And so we have to start actually listening to First Nations. This is the key. And that's why First Nations say truth and then reconciliation. Truth is to actually hear what happened in First Nations residential schools and to hear their point of view. And reconciliation is to actually follow up, realistically follow up on the 94 recommendations. And I'm sorry, there's not one standing government in Canada, NDP, Conservative, or Liberal, that can say that they've actually been addressing this in a meaningful way, which is exactly why you need to vote Green. We need our voice in Parliament to be able to push for this. Please vote Green.
Thank you very much, Mike. Patrick, on the question of reconciliation, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Well, this is an issue that's very personal for me because I come into this work from an Aboriginal law background. I've actually worked for the Squamish Nation and First Nations right across the province. And, you know, I've seen what life was like under a Conservative government where First Nations were treated as a stakeholder rather than a rights holder. And that was simply unlawful and something that had to and has changed. But there's a lot of work to do. I mean, obviously, the issue that's in the news, as it should be, is the issue of clean drinking water. There were 105 long-term boil water drinking water advisories inherited in 2015. 116 have been lifted, but what that shows is that there's more that are becoming long-term boil water advisories. Of those that are there, 75% of them have actually been built, but the remaining 25% are still under construction or in the design and build phase. They take about 3 to 4 years, but we have to get it done. UNDRIP has been now passed into federal law. This is the most transformative piece of legislation for reconciliation in our country's history. And we've made other progress on the calls to action for truth and reconciliation. We now have National Truth and Reconciliation Day on the 30th. We have changed the oath of citizenship so that, you know, recognize Indigenous history in this land. And the TRC calls to action are developed by First Nations, including Senator Murray Sinclair. So that's the playbook. We've also developed an action plan on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. So this is what has been done. We do have a lot more to do, but it's important for us not to push our own ideas on Indigenous peoples. We need to stop, we need to listen, and we need to learn, and we need to take direction from First Nations. And that is something that only starts when you can build trusted relationships. And that's what I've done in the last 2 years is ensure that I have regular meetings with the First Nations in our riding, biweekly meetings with the chief of the Sechelt Nation, as well as the Lilwat Nation, met with the Nkwakwa Nation. And it's actually very difficult to meet with the Squamish Nation because they're very busy, but I sit on a number of different boards with them. So I think it starts from building those relationships and learning from them and taking direction and building a future together.
2 minutes. All right, thank you, Patrick, for that answer. And Doug, we now turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you for the question, Jennifer. I welcome the opportunity to address the press directly. Trudeau has joked about his subversion of the national media, lavishing it with billions of dollars. He thinks it's funny to purchase favorable media coverage and that the press buries his many scandals well into the back pages. Whenever there's collusion between government and media, the result is always propaganda. Government paid media propaganda in Canada is the most egregious during election periods, particularly when the media is able to control debate topics by setting the agenda for all candidates' meetings. We saw this clearly at the Whistler All Candidates meeting when peak editor Claire Ogilvie directed her questions only to candidates of the establishment parties, effectively freezing out the rest of us. But the question still remains as to why local media marches in lockstep, and more recently in goose step, with the same destructive agenda spewed by our national media. A big part of the reason was revealed 2 days ago when Trudeau's payoff to local media was uncovered by a Freedom of Information request. These payoffs were published on the websites of Rebel News and Canada Land in a September 10th article by Jonathan Bradley. The list of recipients is extensive, at 29 pages long. Buried in the details of the $272,821 given to Peak News Magazine and $89,205 given to the Squamish chief. Of course, the Squamish chief has a larger circulation, so you might want to check with Claire Ogilvie as to why she got so much more than you did. Perhaps both of you can then come up with some story as to why we should not simply consider both publications as propaganda outlets of the Liberal government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. And that takes us through the panelist questions and answers, which turns us into time for questions from the audience. And I have seen a steady growth in questions coming in the Q&A box. We have a few questions directed to specific candidates. And so we'll put those from the list when we get to those candidates. And as I always tell my students, if you in the audience don't ask questions, then I have to fill the time by asking questions, and none of the candidates want that. So please do keep your questions coming, and we will work through as many as we can. We're going to start with a question for Gordon. Gordon, calling up the question here. Our audience member says, the health system is in trouble. People are not able to access primary care physicians. Vulnerable folks are finding it even more difficult to be seen and cared for. What is the answer to this growing crisis? Over to you. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, I'm sure the answer to it, like everything else, is just to throw heaps and piles of taxpayer money at it until it goes away, right? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's a great question. And without throwing heaps and piles of taxpayer money at the issue, like do we consider a second tier sort of system? We almost already have one to an extent. You know, either you can pay for medical services if you don't like the options available to you for certain ailments. But no, I don't think I'm going to be able to solve that one single-handedly. I regret to say. Sorry.
Moving right along then to our next question. Thank you, Gordon, for that. Question for you, Terry. Audience member asks, what will you do if elected about the cutting down of old growth trees in BC?
Well, this is a perfect question for Terry Grimwood, because no one has more wood for making live edge furniture and yew wood cutting boards than Terry Grimwood on the Sunshine Coast. I don't cut the trees down myself. I get my best wood off of burn piles, but totally opposed to the continued cutting of the trees on the Vancouver Island as well as on the Sunshine Coast. There's been many people in the coast community, Michael Siddall, Hans Penner, people that have really sacrificed their livelihood and futures by standing up for all of us and opposing those logging practices. I just think that, and even on this, there's a fellow here not today on this group of candidates, an independent candidate. I'm sorry I don't have his name in front of me, but he was suggesting we should be growing hemp because of the yield that they get from hemp as opposed to what we're doing now. And that's the nice thing about participating in these elections, is that I learn so much each time I participate. And there's lots of good ideas from all the corners of the spectrum politically. And it's just a matter of us working as nonpartisan and compromising, but we shouldn't be compromising on cutting old growth trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. John, you're up next, and we have a question specifically directed to you. On electoral reform, if elected, will you support electoral reform by supporting the formation of a National Citizens Assembly on electoral reform?
Yeah.
Over to you.
Transparency is a key element of conservatism. And I think one of the great things about the conservative platform is that conservative MPs are able to oppose their own government on any bill, except for confidence motions. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a conservative. As the founder of the Canadian Constitution Foundation, I believe in freedom. In terms of a special electoral reform commission, I think the question is more, what do we need to change? How can we have our representatives be more like representatives and less like rulers? When I was MP, we had 3 offices in the riding. Our website was consistently rated one of the top 10 websites by Samara, which is a democracy watchdog, because we were transparent and we were responsive to our citizens. So I think that the key thing is to make sure that it's ears to the ground for the member of parliament, somebody who works hard, who understands where democracy is failing. And what I've heard time and again at the doors is that people don't trust this government because it's made promises and commitments that it doesn't deliver on and doesn't seem to have any intention to deliver on. So what we want to do as conservatives is bring in a new approach, stand for integrity, stand for transparency, and make Parliament something that Canadians can be proud of again.
Thank you very much, John. Moving right along, and I'd like to thank all of our attendees for keeping the questions coming in fast and furious. They're almost faster than we can keep up with. I have a question specifically for you, Mike. The question is, given the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, what would you do to support small business survival in our community? And I will add, if elected, because I think that's part of the spirit of the question. So Mike, what would you do to support small business survival in our community? Over to you.
I think the first thing is to recognize that global systemic shocks like COVID are not going to go away, and that we're in, even though we want to work at scale in our local community, we are affected by what's happening on the planet globally and cannot get away from that. So COVID is a perfect example of a global systemic shock, but so is climate change. It's another global systemic shock that's going to affect small business. So if you're trying to run a tourism company and you're shut down because there's smoke in the air or there's fires or the things that we saw this summer, you're affected by that. Now look, there's 17 global systemic shocks that the United Nations has identified for every community on the planet, not just ours. And those are the 17 that we must work on because they're inextricably linked. So if we don't tackle, for example, poverty in our community, your business doesn't actually survive. If we don't tackle gender equality, then you also cannot. Women work in Canada at less of a wage than men for the same job. That's a problem. The same thing is true for all of the big shocks that we're going to be enduring in the next 30 years. And I promise they're coming, because the problem is we're going to 3.5 degrees. That's the elephant in the room tonight, is that no matter what we were to talk about, if we're actually on our way to 3.5 degrees by the end of this century, then it's not business as usual, and your business can't survive. That's why we've put that foremost in our platform, is if we don't answer that fundamental question, nothing is relevant. And that's why I'm actually running. It's not to address the small scale problem. It's to address the really big global shocks that we're going to endure in the coming years. Let me just give you an idea on COVID. We've lost 4.5 million people on COVID, and it's fundamentally transformed your lives. You're all wearing masks. But in the meantime, how many people came online? 83 million. If you take the entire period of COVID, 140 million more people have been added to the planet. And that's the trajectory we're on towards 12 billion. That's the bigger picture. And so what I keep saying to people is don't lose sight of the bigger picture.
Thank you very much, Mike. That's 2 minutes. All right, we moving right through, I have a question for you, Patrick, specifically, and I will read the question here. You have stated that your party will save families 18 times more than what the Conservatives are providing for families by initiating $10 a day daycare. My question is, how are these savings for all families when a significant percentage of families choose to care for and or teach their children at home? So over to you on the topic of childcare for 2 minutes.
Gladly. Well, our national childcare deal is to make the option of childcare available for everybody. So this is an option whether people choose to exercise it or not, but we want to level the playing field so everybody can access a universal, affordable, accessible, quality childcare. That's exactly what our deal provides. And that's going to be really important for all the reasons I mentioned before. For those that choose, of course, it's a choice. People can choose not to enroll their child into childcare. And we've provided supports to make life more affordable for all families through the Canada Child Benefit. And so this is actually something that's indexed to the level of income that someone has. And it actually tops out at almost $7,000 a year per child under the age of 6. So this is really important for making life more affordable for families. And it's actually lifted over 400,000 children out of poverty and lifted over 1,000 or 1 million people Canada-wide out of poverty. So this is a really key aspect of really tackling some of the biggest issues we're seeing in our society. But truly our approach is on making childcare more accessible so that we can grow our economy, so that we can give kids the best start to life, so that we can improve gender equity in our country. And other aspects of that as well that I hadn't had a chance to talk about is we're going to bring on tens of thousands of new ECE workers or early childhood education workers. And a lot of those are actually being taught by Capilano University in Squamish and in North Vancouver and on the Sunshine Coast. And so this is going to be a really key a process to make sure that we have qualified folks to do that work to give children the best start to life. But again, it's really up to families to make the decision that they see as in the best interest of their children, but we want to provide them the option regardless of their level of income.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that answer. Moving through our questions, Doug, I have a question here, and it's your turn at bat, as it were. So the question is, do you support Bill C-15, which I would point out is now passed into law? So I'm going to rephrase the question a bit here and say, would you repeal Bill C-15? And that is legislation which implemented the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And then the original question says, if not, why not? The reverse of that, of course, would be, if you would repeal it, why? So over to you.
So it's over to me. I think that we probably will. Now, this is our latest mail out, and it says facts matter. And before we can have a proper discussion of COVID, we need to examine all the facts. Our most recent mail out says this: a People's Party government will ensure that every Canadian is free and not coerced to choose or not to choose any medical procedure or treatment, including a vaccine, with informed consent, which includes awareness of other effective therapies. mRNA vaccines.
I'm sorry, Doug, the question is about the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
That's right. mRNA vaccines are in fact also therapies and should not be evaluated on that basis. mRNA vaccines do not, and were not designed to prevent infection. The endpoints of the clinical studies were only concerned with the reduction of symptoms and the prevention of serious outcomes. mRNA vaccines are not really vaccines at all. They are therapeutic treatments that must be administered prior to infection. So it's quite reasonable to compare the risk-benefit profiles of mRNA vaccines to those of other treatments, bearing in mind that vaccines carry significant known risks and entirely unknown long-term risks. Alternative treatments.
Sorry, Doug, this is a question about the UN Declaration of the Rights.
This is my time, is it not?
Will you address the question?
Alternative treatments include very low risk alternatives, including hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, which has all but eliminated COVID in India. Recently, a Vancouver company has developed Sanitize, a nitric oxide antiviral nasal spray which reduces the viral load in the
I'm
upper
sorry, Doug,
airways
if you're
by
not done with
99%.
the questions asked, we are going to move on.
Sanitize has been approved in Israel. We've got an ad in the paper here, and the peak is coming.
Okay, we are going to move on. Doug, please address the questions that you are asked. You have time in the closing statement, which you can use for whatever message you wish. Our next question is directed to Gordon. Sorry, I should say it is Gordon's turn. It is a question that is to any candidate. The question is, I have two children, both now in the workforce in Squamish, both of whom have no current chance of entering the housing market in the foreseeable future. Their generation are constantly reevaluating their situation, and in too many cases, they are forced to move away to somewhere where they can afford to live. How will you enable our young people to remain in the area that they love, working in local jobs, paying local taxes if they have no prospect for affordable housing? So local affordable housing and its impact on families. Gordon, over to you.
I'd just like to say first that the last question was clearly not intended for me. So if I could reiterate the moderator's sentiments to target your questions, you may get an answer that you are hoping for. Fortunately, this is actually a pressing issue for myself. As living in Whistler, I am completely unable to afford a townhouse or anything even close to a significant property. So yeah, I would greatly increase the foreign buyers tax, first of all, so fewer homes sit empty as foreign investments or money laundering sinks. I also definitely support a first-time home buyers tax. And perhaps most importantly, and it's too bad Terry Greenwood didn't get this question, I would change the taxation structure to encourage developers to build affordable housing. The current structure actively encourages builders to build luxury vacation homes by taxing affordable housing more aggressively. So, I'm sure it's much the same in Squamish. How much affordable housing have you seen been built in the last 10 years? I've seen a lot of multi-million-dollar vacation homes and condos built up here in Whistler, let me tell you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And as it happens, the next question in the list is actually also about affordable housing. So I wish that Terry gets one on the topic is granted, it would seem, by the debate gods. Terry, the question facing you is, what is your position on affordable housing in this riding? Over to you for 10 minutes.
For how long?
I apologize, 2 minutes.
I thought you said 10 minutes.
I did hear 10 minutes.
I could have gone on for 10 minutes. I've been a licensed builder. I built over $6 million worth of homes in Seychelles over half a dozen years. And the biggest obstacle at the end of the day when the economy changed was I wasn't allowed to rent them. I was trying to let my workers live in some of them. I was buying homes nearby for the workers to live in. And I paid $300,000 for some homes, and before I even closed on them, the prices were valued at $250,000. Now I promised Ruth Moore that I would close, and I did. I bought the house, and just overnight I lost $50,000. That's the reality of being a house builder. But I'd love to work with the councils, whether it be Bone Island, Squamish, Whistler. I have ideas, and it's easy to build affordable housing. All you have to do is start. You just have to start. And the warranty programs that we're required to do today, the development cost charges, when you start adding all these taxes and costs up, they actually exceed the cost of building a small unit. And it's not fair. It's easy to do, and we just need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. John, we are next in line in questions, and our next question is on gun rights in Canada. Our audience member asks, do you believe there is a way to make access to firearms easier for Canadians without jeopardizing our safety?
The recent developments around this were that the Liberals moved from the restricted to the prohibited classification, some 1,500 different types of firearms. We will review each of those classifications, and Aaron O'Toole has said explicitly that we will be making sure that the safety of Canadians is foremost in that review. Let me go back to the affordable housing thing, because I think that is really critical to so many people, and that's why 2 questioners asked it. The Conservative platform has a really fresh approach, 1 million new homes within 3 years, and to cool down the cost, ban the investment by foreigners in residential dwellings, but then rechannel that investment to purpose-built rental houses. So the emphasis is on the supply side. It's also to make it easier to get mortgages, to extend the length of the mortgages and reduce the stress test. And ultimately to make sure that there's no capital gains tax on principal residences. Now, a Liberal candidate, Jason Hickey out of New Brunswick, talked about this possibility, and we know the Liberals have spent some $250,000 investigating that. That's not something that Conservatives would ever allow in our riding or anywhere else in the country. So good approach on affordable housing, and close working with local governments, focusing on getting housing built near public funded transit, which is a great way to leverage the transit and build the houses in more affordable places.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate you addressing the gun issue before moving into the affordable housing question. Mike, we have a question specifically for you from the audience. And the question is as follows. Your party leadership is in disarray. In fact, your own leader, Annamie Paul, may not even win her own seat in the House of Commons. If you are elected, how will you personally be effective for this riding? And will you promise not to abdicate your seat so that your leader can run in our riding to sit in the House?
Well, let's get to the crunch. Will I promise? Yes, I will. I will promise not to abdicate my seat. And I'll tell you why. Because in the Green Party, we believe in 2 things. One is that we're not a whipped party. Now, every other party here tonight is whipped. They must do what their leader says. That's not how it works in the Green Party. You stand up on your own 2 feet and people vote for you personally. As they see if they trust you and they like you and whether you make sense. And if that does make sense, then they look at your party policies. And the party policies are actually driven by the grassroots who must debate those policies. And I will say this, participatory democracy is messy. We don't always agree. And so it does get messy, and there are lots of differences. And that's the fraction, because we've been so transparent about it in the Green Party that everybody has witnessed and the media has been having a heyday with. On the other hand, let's keep in mind that we're discussing some really difficult subjects. At least they're being discussed, and that's important. So what you can expect from me is that I will consistently stand up based on my personal experience and based on what are the policies that are passed by the Green Party, because I do believe they go through a very good discourse. They get thrashed in public, and then eventually we come out with really excellent policies, which and all of them I stand by. I've been asked by numerous political parties to stand, and I've never felt comfortable, because I've always felt comfortable in nonprofits to be able to push what I believe is true. But at this point, we're running so out of time. We need decision makers in Parliament now. And the closest that I can come is the Green Party in terms of tackling the key and fundamental problems. Let me put that on the table. The key and fundamental problems that we need to get past before time runs out. And I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that time is running out. We need people in Ottawa now. And the Green Party actually, if you look at how we actually do the discourse, is the only party that will not just have to follow the leader. And this is something I keep saying to Avi, for example, in the NDP. He's going to have to follow his leader on fracked gas, on the TMX, on old growth logging. No matter what he says personally, he's stuck, as is John and as is Patrick. And they'll claim that they're not whipped, but they are. They must follow the key budget decisions. They cannot get out of that. Whereas in the Green Party, we have that freedom to be able to speak our own minds on every single vote in Parliament. And you can depend on me to do that. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question.
Thank you very much, Mike. Doug, we're over to you, and I have a question that is addressed to you specifically coming from the audience. The question is, what is your party's stance on reconciliation? Mike's
reconciliation. There we
frantically
go.
telling me that my microphone is muted.
No,
I
no,
think
that
I
you
was
have to, you
muted
missed
there.
Patrick.
Oh, again, Patrick, I'm very sorry. Twice in a row.
How about Doug answers this one, then I'll answer the next one.
Yeah,
'Cause
next
I
one?
think
Yeah,
I've
fair
already.
enough. He's already ready. Thank you, Patrick. My apologies. Thank you, Doug. Doug, you may need to unmute your microphone. We can't hear you.
Oh, so we're going to go out of order. Okay. Well, the Indigenous population of Canada is extremely diversified, and it accounts for about 5% of Canada's population. It comprises First Nation, Inuit, Métis. There's more than 600 First Nations communities dispersed across the country, and more than half of those nations, Canadians, don't live on reserves. So our policy on reconciliation has to conform, and it's not that well formed. I'm just beginning to understand this. I've talked to a number of people in the community about what actually is needed. I think initially the Indian Act is going to have to go. It's going to have to be replaced by some other legal framework, which I understand has not even begun to be crafted yet, although you'd think it would have been, given the number of times we've talked about this issue. But respect is important, freedom, fairness, responsibility. And so we're committed to seeking options to replace the paternalistic Indian Act, which keeps Indigenous peoples in a state of dependency and allows federal government to control most aspects of their lives, with some new legal framework that guarantees equal rights, responsibilities to Indigenous people as Canadians, and promotes the self-reliance of their communities. A people's government will respect our Constitution and treaties, will reaffirm the federal government's power to approve natural resources and infrastructure projects after adequate consultation with affected Indigenous groups and in partnership with them to ensure they benefit from these economic opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. And this now is moving us into what will probably be our final round of questions before closing statements. And we have got questions coming in furiously, which I am very grateful for. We're having a challenging time staying on top of them here. Gordon, the next question in our stack.
Wait, Doug, I think you skipped me, remember.
Well, I tell you, Patrick, it's a good thing I'm not running for office because I'm doing a terrible job moderating the debate. Well, thank you. And again, my apologies. The next question, as I was going to say in our stack here, it concerns, you may be surprised to hear this, affordable housing. Specifically, what will you do for affordable housing locally and for getting transit into Vancouver?
Okay, well, great question. I just want to start with, it's great to hear John's intervention on the Conservative plan for housing. I was really hoping to hear it in the debate this morning. But John thought voters would be better served by taking a shot at me on Twitter on housing rather than showing up. And also the claim that we're going to bring in a tax on capital gains on principal residence is simply a baseless lie that the Conservative Party continues to spread. But I do agree that we are in a housing crisis right now. We've, over the last 4 years, we brought in what's called the National Housing Strategy to build purpose-built affordable housing. In Squamish, there's right now 226 units that are being built with support from the federal government. This is a start, but we also need to address housing affordability more writ large. And that's exactly what we're doing with what we've proposed in our platform this year, dealing with 3 integrated planks of that, both the supply, demand, and some of the practices leading to speculation. So we're going to build 1.4 million homes in this country. And we're going to do that through a number of different programs, like providing incentives to municipalities to speed up the building approval process and to have more inclusionary zoning. Introducing a rent-to-own program. We're going to make it easier for people to get into the market by doubling the first-time homebuyers incentive and converting it to a loan rather than shared equity model. We're going to lower the cost of insurance, among other things. And on the speculation side, we're going to ban blind bidding, bring in a legal right to a home inspection, have a 2-year ban on new foreign ownership. And we're also going to bring in a new agency to tackle money laundering and other financial crimes. We're going to tackle rent evictions by outlawing that, as well as bringing in a tax on property flipping. On the regional transit side, this has been something I've been working on for quite some time, and there is a solution in place that all the municipalities found to bring in a fuel surcharge. It got rejected by the province. I have had some discussions with the provincial minister of transport. There are a few options on the table. I'm waiting for him to get back to me. He has been very slow to get back to me on that, but the federal government is a willing partner in reestablishing that service that was lost when Greyhound shut down a few years ago.
Thank you much, Patrick, for your answer and also for your forbearance, as I apparently can't keep track of the names on my list. So as I was saying before I so rudely overruled Patrick there, we are now down to our last round of questions from the audience before closing statements. And I know we will not be able to get all of the questions asked, so I would like to thank all of the members in the audience for putting in their questions and for keeping them coming, particularly for aiming them to specific candidates. Gordon, our next question on the list concerns, as it would happen, regional transit, a perennial topic at these Squamish All Candidates meetings. The question is, what are your commitments when it comes to regional transit? It is a long-standing issue. The Sea to Sky Highway is seeing an unprecedented flow of traffic, and it could be alleviated by better regional transit options. What would you do if elected to support this?
I am a firm believer in public transportation. I, in fact, have never owned a car in my life. And yeah, I would be firmly committed to increasing not only public transportation within the various communities in the Sea to Sky, but also in between them and to Vancouver. I would introduce proposals to fund these as much as necessary in order to get them going and to keep them going. I just want to go back for a minute and touch on the gun issue, because I feel it's important to note that we don't have to sacrifice safety to make guns accessible, because the level at which they're accessible now doesn't put anybody in danger. We've got national embarrassment Bill Blair spreading disinformation furiously about firearms to justify Trudeau's blatant abuse of a national tragedy a few years ago in order to ban scary looking guns in an executive order that spat directly in the face of our democracy and sidestepped the House. So yeah, you know, we have our current gun legislation works. Automatic weapons are not freely available. Assault weapons are not freely available. This is nonsense, and yeah, we need to take care of hunters, recognize that there are hobby shooters out there obeying the law. And if you look at the statistics on gun crimes and gun deaths, you will be shocked. You'll be shocked. Guess what? Criminals don't care about gun laws. They're using illegal guns imported from the States. As long as we share a huge border with the States, they're going to come in, and we need to focus on those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. We have a question specifically for you, Terry, and the question is, in the 2019 election, you said that you believed in building pubs every 50 kilometers across Canada. Do you still believe that this is right for Canada, and how would you make them COVID safe?
Oh, just build them and the people will come. We need the hubs, and actually I changed the wording here on my platform. This time I called it Rural Canada Starter Towns, but I was referring to hubs when I ran in South Burnaby 3 years ago when Mr. Singh got elected the NDP leader, and I didn't get any traction with it, but the provincial NDP took note of it, and but I haven't seen any success from it. But more recently, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But in the last general election, I was in Roberts Creek, I believe, and I changed hub to pub, and that's where the pub came up. But we need to. I've gone tens of thousands of kilometers on buses when Greyhound was running people up to Kelowna and Vernon and places like that. And it's not the buses. You need to have a hub. I would be going in the middle of the night from Vancouver, and if the bus was canceled, they put you out on the street. There wasn't a place where you could get out of the weather in the winter months. It's the hub that you need. And if you build the hubs, the people will migrate to them. Some of the hubs will make gelato. Some of the hubs will make cheese. And that's the other thing we need in Canada. We need to have warehousing for Canadian-made products, food products, to go across this country. The Sunshine Coast had Holy Crap. Well, Holy Crap basically lost its wholesalers where they would get their products distributed. And that's why that company suffered. There was no Canadian company prepared to floor their product. And they're just one of thousands of Canadian companies that need their products to get out there.
Thank
We
you.
need
I'm
to
afraid
buy
that is 2
Canadian.
minutes. Moving along, John, I have a question addressed specifically for you from the audience. And the question is as follows. Will your party commit to a universal electronic proof of vaccination system in cooperation with other countries that will allow for safe and efficient global travel to and from Canada?
You'd think I'd get used to that unmute button by now. So thank you for the question. This is a pandemic election. This is our $610 million election called in a pandemic by a prime minister who has bungled the rollout and had the audacity 48 hours before calling his selfish election to declare his mandate, which was divisive, deceptive, and despicable. The Conservative Party, by contrast, has said, yes, we encourage vaccines. Everybody should have them because they're the best tool against the pandemic. We also acknowledge that individuals have freedom in healthcare in Canada. So it's a free choice. In terms of the provincial authority, we recognize that the provinces have authority over the passport. And so the Conservative Party under Aaron O'Toole has said, we will defer to provincial authority. Personally, because this is such an important issue, I've said within 60 days of becoming a member of parliament, if I do, that I would be convening a forum in this riding so that every voice can be heard. And hopefully the health minister would be at my shoulder. On the international scene, we would be doing our best to streamline with other countries. It's such a fast moving situation right now. We know that the rules are changing in other countries that make it difficult for Canadians to go there. So we would be working on that. Let me get back to something that Patrick said just a second ago, about appearing or not appearing at debates. The worst thing that people in public life can do is be seen as hypocrites. And, to not appear last night at a debate where we were all invited, and Michael and Doug and I were very disappointed you weren't there, Patrick. And then to turn around and say, well, I wasn't at a debate this morning. You can't be at every debate, and you know that. And your leader has brought so low the respect.
Thank you very much, John. That is 2 minutes.
We have to move beyond. We have to move beyond the hypocrisy.
Thank you very much, John. Mike, our next question is again addressed specifically to you. This question is as follows. What strategies would you and your party employ, if elected, to address the overdose crisis, which has thus far resulted in more deaths than the COVID crisis in BC?
Mm-hmm. That's a very serious question, but I just have to say, John, it is possible to be at every debate because I have been there. I think I'm the only person. Anyway, back to the opioid crisis, which is a dead serious question, because I think so far in COVID, we've lost about 1,877 souls since the beginning of the crisis. But my understanding is we've lost over 7,000 since the beginning of the emergency on opioids. And the number one thing is we need to listen to healthcare workers who are on the front line of this problem in the downtown east side and other places. And also not just in the downtown east side, by the way, because the opioid crisis happens no matter what level of income you have. And we know that about that crisis. Here's the thing. They all say the same thing. Quote Bob Marley, legalize it. Seriously. It didn't kill us to legalize marijuana, and it's not going to kill us to legalize illicit drugs. And what it immediately does is it allows you to control those drugs. It allows you to control safe injection sites, and it allows you to treat this problem as a healthcare problem. And that's where it belongs. Because years ago, I did a film actually on this. And I remember the quote in the film was really good. It sticks with me till this day. It was, "But by the grace of God go I." And if you spend any time with somebody who is addicted to opioids, you realize that we need to treat it as a holistic issue in which the root causes of why a person got addicted to opioids, whether that was poverty, their background, abuse, who knows what it was. But when we look at it holistically, we realize we can treat it holistically. But first, we've got to take it out of the stigma of being a criminal activity, pull it into a legal framework where healthcare workers can work with people every day to improve their lives, to be able to get them off opioids, and to be able to treat it so that we don't have fentanyl and other, this is the key thing, talk to people in the streets. It's like the illegal nature of this. If we could legalize it, we could get fentanyl out of it and we'd save lives tomorrow. And we'd be able to look at it for the issue that it is, which is one of holistic healthcare, in which we ask, why did the person get on this in the first place? What drove them to the streets? What drove them to have to be addicted on opioids? That's absolutely critical. And that's why at the Green Party, we keep saying the same thing. Don't look for a simple cause and effect. Take the whole picture, put it together, and we'll see that these things can be solved as they have been solved in other countries, by the way. This has been solved in other countries, and we need to look at how they did it. And the number one thing people tell us is legalize it and treat it so that you can control it.
Thank you very much, Mike. Question again, Patrick, this question is for you specifically. And I remembered you're there this time. I think if, John, you're finding the mute button problematic, I'm finding keeping track of all the candidates problematic. So the question for Patrick is, how can the voters in our riding trust the Liberals to implement the policies needed to meet your carbon emission reduction targets when your government reneged on its promise to reform the electoral system in order to make 2015 the last election decided by the first past the vote voting system?
I can give a very, very simple answer to this, actually, and that's because of legislation that we passed earlier this year. And it's legislation that I had a direct role in actually strengthening to make sure what's even better than what was originally proposed. And that's the Net Zero Climate Accountability Act. So it requires governments to not only set ambitious climate targets that are consistent with the science, but to have a plan to report regularly on it, including independent evaluation of that. So this is really important because, you know, we've throughout Canada's history set climate targets without ever having a real plan to get there. This will avoid that. We've now introduced our Strengthened Climate Plan last December, which is one of the most comprehensive plans in the entire world, covers every aspect of our economy. And that's why it's been endorsed by people like Andrew Weaver, who's the former head of the BC Green Party, and an internationally recognized intergovernmental panel on climate change scientists. So we have a very, very strong plan that's going to help get it, or that's going to get us there. And it's going to do that in a way that's going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. And Squamish is going to be the beneficiary of a lot of them because it already has two of the Canada's unicorn clean tech companies in carbon engineering and Denexi, and it has the potential to really serve as a clean tech hub and really create a lot of growth and prosperity as a result of that. So it's very simple. It's the law. And as someone like myself who's very passionate about this area, I'm going to ensure that we continue to implement those measures. And we've already brought in $53 billion in new spending towards fighting climate change and a green recovery just since last November. So lots has been done. We have much more to do. I just want to comment quickly on John's comment. Jonathan Wilkinson and I split the debates focused on the Persian community for the North Shore. I did the one on Saturday with Mike and others, and he agreed to do the one last night. I'll just leave it there.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Patrick.
Wasn't there either.
And Doug, we have a question for you specifically, and that is as follows. What is the PPC position on climate change?
Climate change. All right. Well, I'll touch on this topic briefly here. First, let me say clearly that there's no emergency. The predicted emergency is not even scheduled for another 50 years or so. So the silly claim that we're experiencing the effects of global warming now, before the predicted warming has actually occurred, is actually quite absurd. Talk about putting the cart before the horse. The much referenced Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has been a fraudulent body from its inception. And you can read more about this on my website, bebppc.ca, under the climate tab. snake oil salesman Al Gore and Morris Strong cooked up this using biased terms of reference and then went on to profit handsomely from the scam. Today, the IPCC cannot back down from the nonsense it publishes because to do so would negate the very reason for its existence. Some important facts to consider are the healthy, current, and growing polar bear population, the fine recovery of the Great Barrier Reef, the only steady rise in sea level over centuries that has not accelerated, and the growing polar ice caps, all of which are easily researchable and in fact available in Patrick Moore's book, Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Threats of Doom, which is written at about the age of 15, 16, and probably understandable by most, including the Green candidate. So the ice caps were previously forecast to have completely disappeared by now. So I would be interested to hear Mike's latest revised estimate of when the polar regions will finally be free of ice. Please do tell us when, Mike. Just give us the date.
I'm afraid that is 2 minutes. And although, Mike, I'm sure you'd like to respond to that, we actually have to move to closing statements from everyone if we're to have a hope of wrapping this up somewhere close to when we said we would. So I'm going to invite all candidates again following our speaking order for a 2-minute closing statement. And this time is yours. So whatever you feel you want to leave in the minds of the audience as they make their final choices in the days leading up to Election Day, now's the time. We're going to start with you, Gordon, for your closing statement of 2 minutes, please.
First, I'd like to point out some of us were not given the honor of being invited to all of the debates, so I have actually attended all of the ones I've been invited to, I assure you. Anyway, this election has been called a referendum on Justin Trudeau, but it's more than that. It is a referendum on blatant institutional corruption. It's so out of hand that they barely hide it, then they try to play it off when it's exposed. Multiple ethics breaches after accepting favors for himself and his family, handing out huge government contracts, and Prime Minister Gladhand tried to say he didn't think it was wrong. So either he's completely full of it, or he is incapable of even learning the difference between right and wrong, between breaches of ethics. Sadly, we expect our politicians to rob us, but his arrogance in the face of his exposed misdeeds adds insult to injury. I think it's time we stopped electing celebrities to power in North America. It's safe to say it's been a failed experiment. To continue to vote for Trudeau at this point is like asking to be slapped in the face with your own wallet. Fellow candidates, listen up, please. Whoever wins, you want the respect of the cynical, disenfranchised people I represent. Then the first time your party does something unforgivable after you get to office, and it's going to happen, don't turn a blind eye. Walk the aisle, sit in as independent, and truly represent this riding in a nonpartisan fashion, knowing full well it will damn you to sit on the sidelines with me next election while the endorsed puppets put on their next show. You got the seat, what do you care? You do that and the first round of drinks are on me. We've seen this more of the same tired tactics and talking points, and I am continually unimpressed. Two of these gentlemen have had a turn, and with them, you know, it's the status quo. To liberals and conservatives both, you are all equally worthless piles of votes and tax revenue. If you're leaning liberal, just vote Avi. If you're leaning Tory, just vote for Doug. And if you think the whole lot are full of crap, and they always have been, I'd be honored to accept your vote. Thank you. I'm Gordon Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Gordon. I think you may also have won the dog vote there quite significantly.
Yeah, sorry, he was feeling neglected, 90-pound lapdog.
All right, moving right along then. Terry, over to you for your closing statement.
I don't know if you noticed it, but I took pictures of Gordon with his dog. And I'm trying to compete with him now because I've got my iceberg logo for Canada Fresh. And if you read it, I don't know if you can see it, but I went to Toronto Centre and stayed healthy with the COVID to run in the by-election there. Thank you, Doug Monroe, for coming all the way from PEI on Zoom. It must be very late there. I think there's at least a 3-hour time difference. And everybody has to go on the internet and look up the Confederation Bridge to PEI, because that's what we need on the Sunshine Coast. And you will be amazed at the climate benefits from doing that. So Bridge to the Sunshine Coast, I proposed 3 years ago in the Burnaby by-election to have a travel passport for Canada. Now, this was before COVID, but we need to have Canadians supporting Canadians. Patrick Wheeler said land is expensive in Squamish. I said build childcare on the existing school grounds. We always find an obstacle. Just do it. Election Canada in every province. The only Election Canada office is in Gatineau, Quebec, and we need one in every province. Never have another 5-week election. This is a disaster. It didn't support me communicating with the community, not 1 minute. I believe in election reform, vote 1, 2, 3. I got 68% of the second vote in exit polls in West Vancouver in the last general election. I would have won if we had vote 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much, Terry. That is 2 minutes.
Thank you.
John, we turn the floor over to you now for your 2-minute closing statement.
Well, thank you, Doug. And thank you, people of Squamish. The most important thing in a democracy is the long-term consequences of the things that we do. And it's been said many times this evening and many times at the doorsteps. This is an election about trust. And it wasn't always that way. It didn't have to be that way. But this prime minister called an unnecessary election in a pandemic. It will cost us $610 million. This prime minister broke his promise on proportional representation. He promised us accountability, and then we had the 3 ethical scandals that we know about. He promised reconciliation, and we're still waiting for water on First Nations reserves. And he promised us a prominent role on the world stage, and all we received was abandoning our allies and our own citizens in Afghanistan while he prepared for an election. The economy is in a shambles. We've lost 1 million jobs in the pandemic. And since the budget was brought in by this Liberal government, we're 250,000 jobs behind their forecast for job recovery. We're the only country to contract in the G7 in the last quarter, and our cost of living is going up, up, up. The Conservatives offer a comprehensive plan to rebuild the economy, bring back 1 million jobs within a year. And it's a recovery plan. It's a plan to secure the future. If I'm your member of parliament, you'll have 3 things. You'll have a comprehensive plan. You'll have a fine new leader in Aaron O'Toole. And you'll have a member of parliament who is committed to work with you, to represent you, to have offices around the riding, and to make sure that your voices count. That's why I'm asking for your sacred franchise, that vote on election day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Mike, over to you.
Thank you. You know, you've heard a lot tonight about sort of competition and opponents, and I want to introduce a different idea from the Green Party. And one is that the greatest compliment you can have from somebody else who you're contesting with is that they actually start to sound like you, because now you're transforming the minds of your opponent. And the idea, the best deal is when actually you can leave the stage and they actually take your place. And that's what's happening. For example, Avi has gotten to the point now where he's literally this last week, I've been putting out advertisements in which I say, vote with your head and vote with your heart. And now he's repeating those lines. He's moved from 50% to 60%. We're hearing each person try to be green. Even John from the Conservative Party says, I'm a green Tory. The value in that is that we're transforming the way people think in the public discourse. And this is why we need green people in Parliament, because we introduce new ideas like universal basic livable income. 25 years ago, I was a nutcase walking around saying there's going to be 3 times as many forest fires and watch out, climate change is coming. That was 25 years ago. And now every single candidate in this riding is talking climate change. And so that's the value in having Green Party in Parliament, is we introduce creative new ideas. We're able to change the discourse. And most importantly, we don't have to own them at the end of the day. I don't care who owns our ideas. What we want is to change the world, make it a better place, survive the coming century. And this is the key thing at the end of the day. The only person I don't seem to have influenced at all, Bev, is Doug Bev. And Doug, as far as I can say, there is actually an ice problem. One year I actually kayaked from Igloolik all the way to Pond Inlet, crossed Baffin Island in my kayak, and the only thing I was trying to prove is that the ice is disappearing, and I guarantee you, having been on the ground, that ice is disappearing, and climate change is real. So I know I'm never going to convince you, but I do enjoy talking with you, and I must say to everybody, since this is our last ACM, it's been an absolute pleasure having a political discourse with you. I do think I've been influenced by you, and I hope we've influenced each other, because that's the way we're going to move politics forward in Canada.
Mike, thank you very much for your opening statement. And this time I will not get the order mixed up. Patrick, over to you.
Well, I just want to start by saying thanks, Doug, for moderating this, and for all the organizers and questioners for putting this on. I also want to thank my fellow candidates. This is our, as Mike said, this is our last debate, and it's really been an honor to share the stage with you and deliberate on the best path forward for our community and our country. And that's been 12 by my count at this point, but maybe there's more. But this election is about one choice. It's about moving forward or backwards. Since forming government in 2015 and 2019, we have very much moved this country forward. We've put in place one of the world's most ambitious and comprehensive climate plans. It has us on track to exceed our original Paris targets, so we increased them. The Conservatives would roll them back, and which would actually violate the Paris Accords. They would also bring back the Northern Gateway pipeline through pristine rainforest in northern BC. We've built affordable housing right here in Squamish. We want to build 1.4 million new homes right across Canada if we're re-elected. The Conservatives are wanting to build just 2/3 of that. We've committed to bringing in 40,000 new childcare spaces and $10 a day daycare. And of course, the Conservatives want to cancel that. So like I said, the choice is very clear. We can move forward or we can move backward. And there's really only two parties that can form government in this election, the Liberals or the Conservatives. In fact, it's actually true in this riding as well. So we can split the progressive vote, we can let the Conservatives win, and that, of course, is what the Conservative Party is pushing. Or we can unite with the party that, according to internationally recognized experts, has the best climate plan, the best housing plan, and the best childcare plan. So serving you over the last 2 years has been the honor of my life, and I've done the utmost to be as connected to you as I could, to hear from you and have your voice be heard in Ottawa. And that's even when we couldn't meet in person. So I hope that you felt well represented over that time, and that I've done everything I can to earn your vote in this election as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And Doug, the final closing statement of the night is yours.
Good. I'm glad to have a word here. This is the ad that appeared in page 44 of the Whistler Peak today. It's going to run in 4 papers in the Sea to Sky region. And it's about a COVID treatment by Sanitize in Vancouver company. It's an antiviral nasal spray that reduces the viral load in the upper airway by 99%. Sanitize has been approved in Israel and the EU. It's being withheld from Canadians by Health Canada under the Liberals. This is an outrage. Why is this? And that's what our ad asks, that question. Why are they not providing this treatment for COVID? From the SNC-Lavalin affair to the Aga Khan affair to the We Charity scandal to their attempt to nullify Parliament through the courts to avoid producing incriminating documents implicating the Winnipeg laboratory in the COVID mess, the Liberals have shown contempt for the Canadian people, contempt for our democratic processes, and have left us with the clear impression that they evaluate every program on the basis of whether or not it can be used for their own benefit. There's no reason to believe that the promises they make today will be any different. Simply put, they do not deserve another term in office. The People's Party is the party of freedom. We trust individuals to make their own choices in life, and we will respect the choices that they make. Unlike all the establishment parties, the PPC rejects vilification and discrimination against all minority groups. We believe in small government and in the sanctity of the individual rights. Foremost among these is the right to free speech, without which a citizenry cannot stand in peaceful opposition to government coercion. Now, without that, democracy fails. As I pointed out earlier this evening, liberal payoffs to media, both national and local, are one more nail in the coffin of Canadian democracy. The People's Party is the sensible, in fact, the only alternative to the corruption in Ottawa. Next Monday, the PPC is providing you with a unique opportunity to put Canada on a better path. Please join us in our struggle to clean Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you to all of our candidates for taking part. Our riding is in fact legendary for the number of these all candidate meetings that get organized all across it. And you've had an absolute marathon of them, and a marathon this evening. I certainly have at least one, possibly only one point of agreement with you, Doug, and that is that democracy is indeed very important. In many places in the world, you express your political opinions by walking with your feet, or sometimes by taking out your AK-47. And in Canada, we can express them and have them listened to at the ballot box. Election day is on Monday, and as I often tell my students, if you don't vote, then don't bother complaining afterwards. Thank you very much for a lovely evening to the candidates and panelists. Thank you to the Squamish Chamber of Commerce for organizing the event, and thank you all. Good night.